Hello everybody, welcome back to BareRose Garage. What are we doing today? Well, you can see I still got the dart in the air and I was just about ready to pull that Slant 6 out of there. I'm out and I'm underneath it here undoing all the nuts and bolts and stuff and getting ready to pull that Slant 6 and that transmission out of there. And I hit something. Well, I didn't hit something, but I came across something. And I thought was worthy of video here. It's another one of those little freaky little things about Mopar, as seen through the eyes of somebody who's only ever played with GM and Fomoco. Now, to dive into this, I got to go back to one of my original videos. Well, it's an older one anyway, when I'm sticking that 460 into that 1958 Ford. Now on that, you'll notice I used two tools that'll save you thousands of dollars in transmission work. And it starts at the carburetor. I'll show you what I mean and how it pertains to what I found on this dart. Once again, we're back over here with my small block Chevy. What two tools am I talking about? Well, you can pick them up for under $10. Get you two of these torpedo levels. And as you've seen in that video, set one this way, level across there, and one this way, level across there. Now, most of you would think, oh, well, duh, that's to level off here. It keeps everything nice and level for your carburetor, right? Yeah, you're spot on. That's part of it. But there's more to that story. If you look down here, notice the angle on the valve cover right there in comparison to the level on your intake manifold. Your carburetor's always got to be level, but the engine, right down to the crankshaft down here, follows that. Oh, it's pretty close to a 4 or 5 degree angle all the way back. Why? Well, because of Newton's laws of motion and science and all of that stuff, and gravity. For one, it's for oiling. It always ensures that the oil runs to the back of the engine, runs down to your oil pan so it can get picked back up and pumped back through the system. That's pretty much standard for it all. And from there, engineers try to make water run uphill, but we'll get into that in another one. This one is about why this right here will save you thousands of dollars in transmissions, in U-joints, and drive lines. How can that do that? Well, it comes over here to the freaky little things I found in these little Mopars that you guys are all excited about. Now, like I said before, this is my first experience with Mopar. I mostly play with Fomoco and GM, mostly Chevy. But this is the first chance to get in deep dive on a Mopar. It's one of the freaky little things that I just found. Well, this is where it comes into play, and I found it while I was taking the driveline off. So let's go look. Okay, so you see the degree on them valve covers. The way the engine that follows the crankshaft goes all the way down. It's about a 4 to 6 degree right in there angle as it comes down. What does that degree follow? Here we go. It also corresponds with your pinion angle. You ever wondered why a pinion is always up like this? Well, yeah, of course, it's for oiling, right? So the oil will climb up there and run back down and climb up. Just exactly what your engine is doing. And it's also on the same degree to match up with the degree I just showed you back there on that engine. What you're doing there is you're making sure as much as possible that everything stays in line. When you're dealing with rotating mass and torque and power and all of that stuff, you want to try as hard as you possibly can to keep everything in line. Now, some things have got to move, like a rear suspension and everything, but you want to eliminate as many side factors, and you don't want to multiply things by making things angle. Every time you angle something, you get what's called torque multipliers or power multipliers. Yeah, we'll go back to Newton's laws on that. Yep, or what's his name with the lever, you know, give me a lever and I'll turn the world. Yep, every time you angle something, you're adding force. So, we go right back to the way I just described, what I just told you about how to set your engines and why you want to make sure it's dead level or as close to level as you can possibly get it off the carb plate, not the valve covers. You want the valve covers to match your pinion angle all the way back. Comes to this. And the reason I show it to you on this is because this is a Mopar. And Mopar, I'm sorry guys, you got it completely wrong. And I'll show you. And I understand why you did it. I get it, I know. Just as I was getting ready to pull this driveline, I reached up here to the infamous slip U-joint slash everything yoke enclosed U-joint type system that Mopar is famous for. Yep, even my 53 DeSoto had one of these, but it was in the back instead of up on the front. The front was solid mounted and it was in the back. Why? Because the angles were different. That's right. When I run into these, normally, because I'm in farm country out here, is on tractors, farm machinery, stuff like that that is using a PTO drive that's on an obscure angle. Anytime that the shaft, the drive shaft, has to go this way, up and into something, generally speaking, you'll have something similar to this going on. Now, what is it doing? What it's doing is it's compensating for those side torques. It's actually making it stronger-ish than a standard regular U-joint like you see back here in the back. Now, that's what cued me in. That's what threw the little trigger in my brain that said, whoa, wait. Because I've only seen these in obscure angles and stuff, what's going on here? So I come up over here to the transmission. And what I did is I measured from the center of the tranny, the center of my yoke, all the way over to the frame of the car. Then I measured from the center here all the way over to the frame of the car. The yoke on this transmission favors the passenger side 3.5 inches. So this whole thing is shifted to the passenger side 3.5 inches. Okay, it's a lot extreme, but I've seen that before in cars. Not always does a car sit in the engine in a car. Not always does it sit perfect center of the car. Sometimes they'll favor one side or the other. But why does it have a torque compensating slip yoke U-joint on there? Those are only for obscure angles. Let's go up and check the front. Now up here is where things get crazy. I measured from the center of the crankshaft to the back side of the frame rail. Before I did this, I made sure the frame rails were parallel. Why? Don't trust those. Again, I played with a lot of Chevy subframes, and on a Chevy, this side over here on the driver's side actually favors out. Why? Because the steering box is in there. So they've moved that frame horn out a little bit in order to make room for the steering box and their steering arm. They did it in front. Big key right there. This one just so happens to be parallel, so I was good to go. So what I did is I measured from the center of the crank here and the harmonic balancer to the outside of the frame rail, from there to the outside of the frame rail here. And what did I come up with? The center of the crank up here is 1/4 inch favoring that side. Only 1/4. It's 3.5 back there. This engine and transmission are mounted in this car cockeyed. Whoa, wait, something's going on here. Something's not right. Sometimes that'll mean a bad motor mount or something. See, you know, something's going on. Nope, come to find out that's exactly the way Mopar intended it to be. Because as I was walking back there to check the transmission, the tranny mount, it damn near hit me in the head. The pitman arm on your steering box, that's what it's doing. That's why it's set like this. The pitman arm has got to move freely in here. And your center link and your steering system, as all of this stuff has got to move freely with no obstruction. And in fact, on this one, if you look on the back side of the oil pan, I can see where this pitman arm has actually made contact a couple of times with the oil pan. So it's tight, it's close in there as it comes through its motion. I would turn the wheels, but I got everything undone up on the top, so things are laying on it right now, so I can't do it. Anyway, get to the end. They had to move the engine this way in order to make room for that pitman arm to come across to steer the car and keep everything out of the way of it so nothing falls down, nothing interferes with your steering wheel, so when you're driving down the road it don't all of a sudden, oh, I can't steer, and you crash the car. To make up for that, they took the engine and tranny and drastically, 3 inches is drastic. That's a big offset. that's a big angle. And I can see why they did it here, because they got no more room, because it's a slant. It slants to this side. They couldn't move it any farther over this way because it slants this way. They couldn't, if it was a straight 6, like an AMC or any of them, you know, an AMC is pretty much a slant 6 that isn't slanted. They stood them up, pretty much. They're a different engine, but you get what I'm talking about. And I think that's why Chrysler guys really like AMC, because they're pretty similar. They just went and stood them up. Anyway, if it was standing straight up, they probably would have just mounted it in there straight, like it should have been, and just kicked the whole thing over 3 inches. But they couldn't. They ran out of room. To make up for it, again, they went. Now what that does, though, is it takes your drive line, and you'll see it here when I show you down the car, and puts that kink in it right there. Now why does that matter? Like I said, why does it matter to try to keep everything in line? Well, anytime you do that, you're adding what's called side torque. Side torque is when you're force multiplying to an opposing side. Now that's what they are using that odd, weird looking U-joint, slip joint thing for. It's on there to keep vibration away from that angle. Now they used to use it on their rear ends. Like I said though, back then, that slip U-joint vibration torque dampener was on the rear end side of it. They were using it for this motion. Now they're using it for not only this motion, but this motion as well, because it's moving out here and up and down. So yeah, bad things are going to happen if I was to lock this engine down. Now a lot of you guys out there that are especially the Mopar guys, I hear a lot of you talk about trying to get the rear pinion to seal, or get your transmission, the rear end of them, to seal. If they're set up like this, I can see why they leak. Yeah, it's because that torque is pushed hard against one side of the transmission tail housing as it's, you know, it's trying to tear it apart. And it'll always, I mean, you can't keep a seal in them. They'll always drip a little out of there. Because of that, all of the force multiplied all the way from number 1 cylinder all the way through number 8 to the end of the transmission, to the yoke right there. It's getting hammered there because they're mounted in there cockeyed. Now that I know what I'm looking for, boy, you can see it. And there's an optical illusion going on because the car is actually designed for it to be offset. So the transmission tunnel and everything follow it. So it'll play goofy with your eyes, but once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. As you look down that car, I don't know if you can pick it up on camera, but I can really tell now that driveline is way crooked in there because it has to be to get around that steering box, and it's another drawback of the K member in Chrysler. Whew. So how am I going to get around doing this? How am I going to get around that? How am I going to straighten this back out is what I'm saying. Like I said, a lot of you guys that are having transmission problems, you're ripping the tail shaft out of your cars, a lot of it goes back either to this, your carb plate here on the intake manifold isn't level to your to the car, level for ride height this way and this way, or the engine is mounted in there this way or this way. Either way, you're applying multiple angles on something that should only have to deal with this and not this. You know what I mean? Anyway, I hope that helps some of you out there. If you're having them troubles, pull out a tape measure. Measure from your tail housing to your transmission to the outsides of the car. Make sure that that matches. If it's offset, it's offset. It doesn't matter. As long as it's offset even with the crank all the way down to the driveline. In extreme racing, you'll hear what they say, you know, did you center your rear end? That's exactly what they're doing, is they're taking the rear end pinion, you know, your yoke in the rear end to the driveline. What they're centering is to get that angle straight from the driveline all the way in. So the only forces you're dealing with are up and down as it goes through its suspension travel. And it doesn't have to like this. The more you go like this, whoa, the worse it gets, the more force you're applying, side torque force you're applying, and it's gonna, in a lot of cases, it tears the tail shaft out of the transmission. Just blows them to pieces. All you got to do is center them up, and it'll take care of a lot of that, especially if you solid mount it. Anytime you solid mount something, make it strong in one point, it's going to be weak in the other. And usually the weakest link, you can see how a transmission tapers all the way down. I got plenty of them around here I can show you. But you can see it with your eye where the next weak link is going to be. It's not going to be the crank because of the, you know, your harmonic balancer, because it's out here in no man's land. But it goes all the way down to the end of your tail shaft on your transmission. It gets tiny and it's hanging out there in no man's land, making it easy for that to go wham and break it right off. So I hope that helps you out there, and any of you that are having those issues, a lot of times it's not your transmission, it's your driveline angle. Not this up and down, but looking straight down it. If you can bring that in and straighten it out, it'll eliminate 75% of all your issues. Meantime, I got to get this engine out of here and this transmission out of here and try to figure out how to work around that drastically cockeyed engine in there. That is a major design workaround. I can't call it a flaw because these cars, if I was to put this car back stock and drive it the way that it was supposed to be intended to be driven, this car would last probably another 100, 200,000 miles. Another 40, 50 years it'd be on the road as long as it's taken care of. That little 225 Slant 6 with that automatic, with those leaf springs in the rear end. Leaf springs are very forgiving. This little thing doesn't make enough horsepower to hurt itself, and it wouldn't matter if it did, because that 1965 technology slush box nasty transmission is robbing so much out of that little Slant 6 that it can't hurt itself. So I hope that helps everybody out there. In the meantime, get out there and get some metal hot, even if it is scratching your head trying to figure out how you can change what somebody else has already done. We'll catch you on the next one.